Okay, we are live on Facebook via Zoom. I'm Akua Leslie Hope speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the Southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors, by whose grace I exist and am sustained. This event is funded in part by poets and writers with public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the New York State Legislature. This reading is being recorded, so if you have any concerns, remove your image. Inaugurated in September 2020, the series seeks to remediate the paucity of presentations of speculative poetry by its living creators. Speculative Sunday's poetry reading series has presented 27 poets thus far. What, you might ask, is speculative poetry? Speculative poetry, the poetry of possibilities, includes alternate history, cryptids, monsters, cyberpunk, dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, mythology, occult, paranormal, robot, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, solar funk, space opera, superhero, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and weird. It takes all poetic forms plus one of its own called scifaiku. Jenna Lee, our poet for this evening, is the author of 3 full-length poetry collections: 6 Rivers, from NYQ Books in 2011, A History of Cetacean America Diaspora, Indolent Books 2017, which was an Elgin Award 2nd place winner. Wow. And Manatee Lagoon, I love that title, Acre Books 2022. She was selected by Marilyn Nelson as winner of Poetry by the Sea's inaugural sonnet competition. Her poems appear in Agni, Denver Quarterly, Los Angeles Review, Massachusetts Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, Poet Law, Verse Daily, and West Branch. A daughter of Vietnamese refugees, she has a BA in math, and an MD, and works as a physician in New York City. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you so much for having me, Aqua. I think this reading series is such a wonderful thing. I'm so glad that there's a home for speculative poetry, which I feel I'm very passionate about. So I'm so glad to be here reading. I'm going to start with a poem of mine that got published in a Starline, and it's titled Commander Daphne. And I'll tell you a little bit about the poem. I grew up fascinated by all kinds of mythology and folklore. I remember reading Greek myths growing up, and a lot of the myths, such as the myth of Apollo and Daphne, they're myths that make you, that give me a lot of anxiety. Myths where women were often in flight, often being pursued, often being advanced upon in a way that was unwanted. And I wanted to reclaim that myth because, on the one hand, even though Daphne is always in flight, if you look at it another way, she's also never caught. So I wanted to lean into that part of the myth. So this is a sci-fi poem, and it's called Commander Daphne. I just want to show you the poem. It's written in short lines, rhymed couplets, rhymed quatrains, you'll see. Commander Daphne, her hands, stiff, gauntleted, close leadenly around the spaceship's glassy red door handle. In one bound, she flings her silver-suited body toward the narrow airlock. Heavy-booted legs are first to arrow through the tight, round portal. Next, her thighs in haste slide through. Then, like a girdle, the threshold hugs her waist. But all this time, the swarm's been gaining on her quickly. Shifting shape, it forms a tentacle that thickly coils around her throat as if it would obstruct her breath. She yelps a note into the mouthpiece tucked inside her helmet. This initiates a morph. Her fingers start to hiss like noisy ocean surf, transmuting into cells of energy, pure light. She'll turn up somewhere else, reconstitute her slight corporeal frame someplace it's safer, and start over. She always does. She has raced Apollo like this forever. So I'm fascinated by all forms of speculative poetry. Sci-fi poetry is one of the later subgenres that I've become interested in. And I'm going to read another very, very different sci-fi poem. This started out as a cutout poem. I was cutting up magazines. This was shortly before my daughter was born. So I was in this kind of I think I wrote this poem maybe 2 or 3 days before my daughter was born. So I was in this kind of like a very tired and yet very tired and yet generative state of mind. And I started cutting up an article about the painter John Singer Sargent, and I was cutting up another article about the Apollo missions, and then a third article about neuroscience research. And I started mixing up sentences from the 3 articles, and that's this and I got this poem. It's called A Lunar Rake. John Singer Sargent seemed, before I start, a lunar rake is an actual implement. It's used for raking up rocks on the moon. So when on the Apollo missions, when they were collecting samples of moon soil, they actually used this special rake called a lunar rake. And I love that phrase, a lunar rake. So the poem, a lunar rake. John Singer Sargent seemed the embodiment of a lunar rake. He consorted with bold theatrical women for hours on the moon's surface. In the grainy footage, one of them wears a diver's wetsuit and flotation collar, flying end over end in the fully illuminated sky. Oh, the scandals they created. When you remove the physical constraints, the brain is a black hammer that pokes out from the scalp to see the sun steaming south in the sky with his blades dipped in bronze. So yeah, that's just a sampling of my sci-fi work. I'm going to talk about another sort of subgenre I've been dipping into. So a couple of years ago, I think during the pandemic, I know a lot of us developed different obsessive fixations during that time that we might not have fixated on had it been a more normal time. And one of mine is, there's a movie from 1986 called Labyrinth. Who here has seen it? Is anyone that's a Labyrinth? I'm a Labyrinth super fan now. I was watching this movie maybe every week, maybe more. I was getting very, very into, I can basically recite this movie now, but I got into this mindset where I started just thinking about different aspects of that movie, about the universe it takes place in, and it started invading a lot of my poems. So I'm going to read just 3 very different poems that I wrote kind of in this labyrinth drug haze that I was in in 2021. So this is a sonnet, and it was published in Light, which is a wonderful magazine that publishes all kinds of poetry. It's called On Daylight Savings Time, and we're almost getting to. I feel like we're always almost getting. Yeah, the way the year is set, because we're always almost getting there now. On Daylight Savings Time. Locking up the store at 5 p.m. in mid-November, I feel horror clutch my throat with twig dry fingers as I watch an overlarge full moon, gold hoop skirt hemmed with spidery gray lace, lurch into sight. I know that daylight savings time is to blame for its too early advent. All the same, my body feels betrayed, as when the bite of rheumatism makes my kneecaps hiss. Too old, too fast, too soon. Years prior to this, I met a green man on a mountainside who offered me eternal life if I'd consent that very hour to be his bride. If he returned tonight, I might say yes. So that's a sonnet. It's actually a lot of my poems are sort of stealth sonnets. So here's another very different one. This is also from my Labyrinth suite. This one was an Alaska Quarterly Review. It's called Guardian Angel, and it's in the voice of the supernatural, seductive male figure, Guardian Angel. In my room full of phonograph trumpets, I listen for one voice from miles far off to rise above the rest, your voice. Then I become the owl I am, and using Earth's magnetic field to guide me, I fly into your mouth, make your palate vibrate with the whoosh of my wings. I tangle in the windsock of your breathing. I am the brown paper bag in which you bury your head to avoid hyperventilating. I tango with your throat until the carbon dioxide you exhale makes a mist that wipes clean your memory of ever having not been enough, of ever having been anything other than deserving. And this is the last one I'll read from that group. So this is it's called Sumanka, which is I'm very interested by different verse forms from different cultures. And Sumanka is a verse form from Japanese poetry. It's a poem that takes the form of it's a 10-line poem consisting of a 5-line stanza, then another 5-line stanza, and each stanza is supposed to be in a voice of a different person, often two lovers kind of bantering with each other. So this is a Sumanka in the voice of the supernatural, seductive male figure than the human woman. I'm sort of picturing this taking place, well, I mean, I guess in simplest terms, many years after the events of Labyrinth, but it's basically people who are kind of older and wiser looking back on a misstep in the past with some degree of regret and that sort of thing. So it's Sumanka. Come gloat once more on my windowsill. The grooves your talons gouged in the wood grain have grown less sharp as the gray years go. Prove this is no prank. I enclose in this letter a peach pit. Plant it. The first grub that gorges will guide you to my door. So I'm going to read a couple poems from my books. So this is my newest book, Manatee Lagoon. Thank you. It's the title is taken from an actual place I love in Florida, where manatees like to gather. And there's all sorts of the manatee motif kind of weaves in and out. The manatee doesn't appear explicitly in this one poem. This is a poem called Please Don't Tell Me How the Story Ends, which is the title of a country song I love. And it's, you'll see, please don't tell me how the story ends. A Vermont man, rural, lacerated his knee with a chainsaw doing tree work one summer. The wound festered, not angrily, but with a slow, simmering puzzlement. This lasted years. One day, he fingered it, felt something hard inside, pulled out a shiny piece of glass. Another time, he pulled a blade of grass out of it, then a whole maple leaf, so perfect it filled Canadian flag makers with envy. Started feeling mighty proud of himself like King Arthur when he made that stone belch up a sword, began pulling bigger and bigger things out of his knee, a dime, a dollar bill, a bandana, a quail's egg, and the quail hatched too. Got to calling himself the wizard, made the circuit of local festivals, state fairs. You'd think this story ends someplace bad, a psych ward, OR, or early grave, a wimpled lady shoveling dirt on a corpse that died of 3 parts delusion, 1 part gangrene. But I think the times have gotten to you. The pessimists opining on TV have dragged you down to their level. The Vermonter, he's still making the rounds, still finding 7-Eleven receipts, perfectly folded road maps and poetry broadsheets tied with slim blue ribbons in his knee. Sometimes butterflies come foaming out, 5 or 6 at once, beating lavender wings. So one of the things I met April Leslie Hope through her when I was included in the wonderful anthology that she edited non bono, and I think this anthology, which I love, really opened my eyes to the different things speculative poetry can do, and one of the things I love about it is I guess how hopeful it can be, right? Because often I find that when I get myself in sort of a very realist rut, I find I sort of sink into a sort of a pessimism, and it's hard to break out. It can be sort of a sort of anxiety loop, and it can be hard to break out of it. And one of the things I love about this speculative angle is that I can sort of bring optimism back into poetry, find new ways of finding hope for healing and reconciliation and so forth. I have a number of poems that, let me see which ones I should go into here. I'm going to read a couple, I think, from my earlier book. This is A History of the Cetacean American Diaspora. And this is a lovely cover that was produced for the first edition of the book, which is produced by Anchor and Plume Press. I love the cover. It's very speculative in and of itself. And these are poems in which I use either I use the whale motif, I guess, or it uses me. But whales kind of swim in and out of these poems, and whales become a sort of a way for speaking about migration and immigration, and sometimes a metaphor, and sometimes more than a metaphor. I'm just going to read a couple samples to let you see what I mean. I'm going to read there's a sonnet sequence I have in this book called Exodus, which is inspired by how I envisioned my parents' journey as war refugees turned into immigrants coming to America. It's a sonnet sequence, and each sonnet kind of looks at their exodus in a different way. And this one is a sci-fi sonnet, so I thought this would be a good place to read it. Exodus. Dad bellows, "Quick! The spaceship's pulling away from the dock. Now, jump aboard before the hatch shuts." Mom, invariably the calm one, snaps, "Have you gone nuts? To jump that far would break our bones." The harbor teems with tubby gray bodies of Martians anxiously decamp from a planet overswept by poison gas. I put my hand on sister's mouth so blazing vapors can't seep inside her lungs. Dad pays a hard-eyed rocket crewman 80 gnods to let the 7 of us stow away within his cargo hold. For 16 knots, we sleep and shit and piss in that small area. Dad says we'll live like kings once we reach Terra. So, yeah, but I've always loved different mythologies. Greek mythology, I love to read, and all sorts of fairy tales. And I guess it just like the seductive male figure in Labyrinth. I've always been attracted to the fairy queen figure as well, kind of this dangerous, all powerful, feminine supernatural force. And I have some poems in her voice. This is one called The Fairy Queen Speaks. Come, kiss me, you scar-faced old timer. Come embrace me, my post-pubescent pet. Unwind my 100-year-old obi. Strip off my mod designer threads, my green hand-woven kirtle, my Hello Kitty barrette. Let me show you fairyland. Relax, lie back on my recliner. I'm the toast of the town in Edcox, Manhattan, at 8 BC, Tibet. What's your name again? Thomas the Rhymer, Urashima the fisherman? How fast an old dame like me forgets. This poem is about another great supernatural woman in folklore. This is about Baba Yaga of Eastern European folklore. It's of Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga invites me over, but doesn't answer my knock. I test the door, it's unlocked. She's peeling green bell peppers over the kitchen sink, letting the peels fall into a silver colander. I blink. Baba Yaga's kitchen looks exactly like my mother's in Minnesota. The same oily yellow wallpaper, edges peeling like the inflamed skin around a wound. The wall calendar with photos of orchids my mother liked because, as she often remarked, purple is the royal color. The date my report card should arrive by mail, circled in red ink like a noose. On a dusty table next to the calendar, an icy blue rotary phone. I'm 5 years old, listening to my mother intone that I must always say, may I please inquire who is calling, and not can I please, while I glower at her black silk curtained knees. A bundle of newspapers opened to the crossword page, answers penned in the angular handwriting I adopted at 10 because I wanted to become an architect, which I thought a feminine career. Our family's first microwave, which mother feared would give me cancer, the worn down linoleum patch where I stood shivering, breast buds goose fleshed, so that mother could cut my hair. Baba Yaga keeps peeling peppers, hums. I wish I could say this was one of those dreams where Baba Yaga's face turned out to be my mother's, or a wizened version of my own, or anything other than just Baba Yaga, looking exactly as leathery and warty and old as on my book of Russian fairy tales. That by gazing at her, I could be made whole. So, yeah, I'll read one Greek myth one. So I've always been fond of the story of Cupid and Psyche, and this is again, I always I like looking at these Greek myths and kind of like imagining them in different times and different places. That's I guess one of the things I love about them is how timeless so many elements of them are. And so this is a villanelle sort of re-envisioning the story of Cupid and Psyche, but in a more contemporary setting. It's called, as a nod to the name of Psyche, it's called Psyche. A god has taken a shine to you, explains the letter. She's skeptical, but curiosity compels her. His face is masked, his name unsaid. At dawn, one feather curls on her sheets, the only proof that he's been with her. Brain fogged, she brews some coffee, pops an Alka-Seltzer. A god has taken a shine to you, explains the letter, which she rereads. It helps her understand no better. She slams the cooled mug down. What happened last night, Elsa? His face was masked, his name unsaid. At dawn, one feather was all he left, and now you feel beneath the weather. And who says, take a shine anyway? Some corny geezer? A god has taken a shine to you? Like hell, damn a letter. She calls in sick to work. Across her sick mind flitters the thought she should go to church, confront the greaser who goes by God, real name unsaid. But there's that feather she woke beside, which now lies warm against her sweater. The next time he requests her company, she agrees. Her doubt vanished. This time, there's no need for God or shine or letter. His face is masked. No name. Next dawn, another feather. So I'll read a couple more I have here. So I have some sort of. I'll read 3 sonnets that are all kind of about ghosts. I'm a very I don't want to say I'm a ghost believer because during the daytime I'm not. But if you ask me again in a couple hours, I might say something different. So I have three different. I'm going to read 3 different sonnets, all having to do with ghosts. This one is about a Vietnamese proverb, and it's called "Đi với ma mặc áo dày." My dad says, if you walk with ghosts, be sure to wear a paper gown. This proverb, which old folks pass down to children in Vietnam, is close in meaning to the adage, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I gather ghosts are known to glue together broadsheets, fountain pen smudged notebook pages, dollar bills, and napkins browned by coffee spills to make their everyday attire. I wonder, do they like how paper rumples, crinkles, or the vapor newsprint reeks when set on fire? So this is my second ghost sonnet. Thank you very much. This is called New House. And it's a true story. We moved into a new house, as you'll see. New house. I took up occupancy at year's end. An ex-Manhattanite, I felt unmoored on hearing cosmic silences distend each dusk outside the windows and the doors, as if I'd been transported to deep space. The bare tree trunks beyond the glass panes seemed bar lines on a song sheet, the notes erased. Squirrels circled around like costumed elves. I dreamed one evening I saw a brown-haired girl wearing a plain fawn jumper flecked with snow come linger in the space between 2 gnarled and leafless trees and do a puppet show with just her empty hands. I felt no fear, but watched, immersed. I blinked. She was a deer. And I'm going to read the sonnet that Aga Leslie Hope so kindly included in Nombano, which I can't tout enough. I love this book, Mythology of Speculative Poetry by BIPOC poets. This poem also appears in my first collection, 6 Rivers. It's called The Apprentice Pearl Diver. The Apprentice Pearl Diver. The candles in this room are not so bright as the eyes of the apprentice who misguessed how long a lanky boy with a narrow chest can hold his breath on a pearl dive. Hot nights, his ghost still slinks among the village bunks, beds of the boys who were his friends. Lifting the cloths that overlie their naked flanks, he spanks them, teasingly scolding them for sloth. At breakfast the next day, they're too afraid to speak of what they saw. A boy long dead whose ardent eyes seared holes in their chaste sleep. Uneasily, they stand and cross themselves, troop to church in trembling groups of 10 or 12. And when the priest expounds on angels, weep. So, Akbar, what do you think? I can stop there and take questions, if that's all right with you.
I'd love you to read
Yeah,
a few more minutes. Yes, please.
Yeah, I love to do that. Okay, so I have a few others. So I'm gonna read a sweet. I wasn't sure how much I had time for. I brought a couple poems about reincarnation, which is also a theme that.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, good. So I come from a long line of Buddhists. So many people who believe in reincarnation literally. I'm not sure I believe in it literally, but I think the idea of it kind of percolates through the way I understand things. I'm always thinking about reincarnation. So these are two different poems about reincarnation I wrote some time apart. This is one I wrote when I was fairly young. It's called Transmigration. They're both sonnets. Transmigration. In our first afterlife, we'll rut like buffalo. One day, while we crouch, feral as raccoons, rumps furred by goldenrod at hot high noon, a hunter in a coonskin cap will up and go, out the door of his little lop-eared bungalow, and impregnate us with buckshot till we swoon. In our second afterlife, we'll be baboons, huddled on a hilltop where no hunters go. We'll bite each other's ears and screech with laughter until at last we're snuffed out by old age. Finally, in the third life that comes after, we shall be alligators, tessera covered, wrestling with barrel-chested men on stage by day. By night, we'll wrestle with each other. This is a second one, also on a reincarnation theme. This is called "We Are All at Least 50% Water," and I wrote this poem after hearing a piece on the radio about how they run ski resorts, and I learned that the term "a snow-making whale" refers to a man-made pile of snow produced by pressurized snow cannons at a ski resort. In my last life, I was a humpback whale, wide-set eyes glowering sidelong from skin folds near my armpits. My grim, fluted lower lip pocked with drunkard's braille, jabbed up and outward like a shelf of shale, continuing the drab atonal hymn, engraved in droning curves along my scummed underbelly, stretching to my tail. My death lacked drama, a mere overflow of days across a sandbar. I'm a snow whale now. No eyes, no lip, just sparkling hump. And when the wind that peppers skiers' eyes lets rip at me, big scoops of me arise, unsew themselves from me, and leave no stump. So maybe I'll read one more. What do you think? Okay, so I'll end. I brought one more. Let's see, that's right. Yes, so this is a. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So just like the one about the one about the ghost proverb. This is my mind kind of going off on a tangent after hearing a stray comment. It's called Diabetes Test. It's from the journal Mezzo Cammin, which publishes a wonderful formal work, including a lot of sonnets. Diabetes Test. After the blood draw, I sighed, fingers crossed, to which the young phlebotomist replied, "Pray to the glucose gods." I walked outside, my previously nervous mind now lost to musings theological. Who knew such deities existed? Lords assigned not to all sugars, but to just one kind? Olympians whose cragged peak pricks the blue, who sit on crystal thrones placed in a ring, how many of them are there? Governing by Dur Committee Fiat, just how few or many chains of carbon we are blessed to harbor floating in our blood. Just who might these gods be? What offerings please them best? So I'll stop there, I guess. Thank you very much.
You're so wonderful.
Thank you.
You're so fabulous. Oh my gosh. I'm agog. I'm delighted. The texture, the warp and weft of it, just glorious. I invite people to comment or ask questions. I always have questions, but I want the obviously engaged and delighted audience to be able to speak with you also. So if you'd like, unmute yourself. And I don't know if I've made that possible. Let's see. Okay, now it is possible to unmute yourself if you've got a question for Jenna.
Hi, Jenna. This is Miguel. I have a question. I love that last poem. I'm a retired chemist, so that really, I enjoy that a lot. Have you done that with any other poems? Incorporated some chemical imagery into your poetry?
I'm sure I have. So I work as a radiologist. I, off the top of my head, I do have a number of poems incorporating different. Radiologists are a funny way of talking. We often there's a lot of like physical phenomena that degrade MRI imaging, and we give them different names like the zipper artifact or the ghost artifact or the moire artifact. So I have a poem that kind of plays with and breaks apart some of those terms.
So radiologists are naturally poetic.
Yeah, I'm sure. Right, exactly. My poem is only a small contribution to the greater oeuvre made by centuries of anonymous radiologists who've gone around naming things. Before that, I studied math in college, so I have some poems kind of playing with different ideas and proofs and different mathematical concepts. I'm always intrigued by it's such a different world, right? A lot of people in these fields don't necessarily read poetry and yet think in such poetic ways, and one wants actually to bring it all together.
Thank you.
Speaking of that last one, there is a Greek god you should look up. His name is, I believe it's Glykon, that literally translates to sweetie. And I think his name is kind of the same as the root word for glucose. So So
And glycans.
look that up. They aren't sure whether or not he was a real god or whether this one person that was like his priest just kind of made him up.
Right. And that's one of the things I love about. Yeah, one of the things I love about mythology is that if you take a book of Greek myths for kids, you have some myths that are very well established myths from back, and then you have others from the Hellenistic era that one guy basically made up and wrote in a book, and it's so it's all kind of pastished together. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look that up.
Okay. No, I really like your work. It's really great. Love the imagery. And I'm a big Baba Yaga fan myself, so.
Well, Jenna, I like the way you incorporate your daily work into the poems, especially your interactions with patients and that. And so it gives a fresh perspective on it. And I also like the way you incorporate mythology. I'm going to date myself, but I grew up watching every sword and sandal movie there was.
I love them all.
Yeah, even the cheesy.
Spartacus is my favorite. I saw that second grade, so I know what you're saying.
There you go. And if you ever have time, was this Italian-made series called The Sons of Hercules.
Yes, I saw that too.
It's a series for a movie.
I was teaching mythology in high school, which I did about for half the day. German was the other half. And we were waiting for the school year to end. I pull up one of the sons of Hercules and people just laugh at them and how
Yes.
funny they were. But it's nice to see, because the myths are enduring.
Mhm.
And it's just really great to see how you breathe new life in them and use
Yes.
them. I mean, all we had time in school to do was really Greco-Roman, just because of the constraints. But we talk about other mythologies, and yeah, I've incorporated some of the ones into what I write. But it's and it's also nice to see how well you breathe new life into sonnets and use villanelles and things like that. Because so much for what passes as poetry is just emotion that no one bothers to reflect on in tranquility.
Yeah, I love poetic form. I think it
Mhm.
yeah. I love yeah. But as long as I've loved poetry, I've loved poetic form. I think it really yeah. It when I write, in harness together with a poetic form, I find I write. I can go
Mhm.
so much further than I can go by myself without the poetic form. So
I love villanelles,
I
and
co-pilot.
Mhm.
I've only tried Samanthas once. I thought it had to be two different people. So I've never pursued it outside of, workshop where there was someone to write the reply.
I've only written a couple, but yeah, I have another one that's in the voice of two owls, a male owl and a female owl courting each other. Just
Oh,
different personas.
that sounds great. When did you start writing poetry?
So I started. I guess I've always. I remember, there's many answers to that question. I remember when I was my parents are always encouraging me to read and write, and they give me these beautiful blank books and kind of encourage me to keep a journal in one and to write poems in the other. I didn't really start doing it seriously until I think maybe around adolescence, when I was 13 or 14. I was going through kind of a rough time. I was kind of transition to middle school. So high school, it's kind of everything, triggering my OCD, this and that. It's not having a sense that kind of like all adolescents do, not having a sense, wishing I had more control over my own life. And that was kind of what brought me into poetry seriously, I think. So it was probably then I really started, and I never really went more than a month or two without writing a little since then.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, I want to say hi to Jennifer. It's good to see you.
Hi. So nice of you to be here. It's so good to see your face again.
Yeah, I wanted to support you while you're doing this. So you're talking about Hercules. My dad's name was Hercules.
Ah!
Yeah.
Oh,
It's a great name. It's a great name. And Hercule Poirot, right, is also Hercules. Yeah, it's a fantastic name.
Yeah, my mother's name was Sophia, so I got strength and wisdom. Sophia means
yes.
That's perfect. I love that.
I messed up that, right? I could have been Herky Jr., but my mother stopped that in her wisdom. She didn't want me to be a Hercules. So,
Hercules Papas? That sounds lovely, though.
yeah, I don't know. I wonder if how people reacted to the name Hercules when he was in high school. I really don't know. And how
Yeah.
it's hard to know, really. That's a tough time, high school. After that, I would have loved it.
Yes.
So there was a long list of speculative types of poems. Have you gone into any of the more unusual names? I mean, there was, horror. Have you ever done a horror poem or anything of that type?
I personally have not. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Uncle Leslie could speak to it. I personally haven't.
I was
No.
going to say that I've now evolved my understanding of horror, having been exposed to more horror poets. And so The Apprentice Pearl Divers could be seen as a horror poem, even the way people can see, any of the ghost poems might be
Right.
horror poems. But even the ever-giving knee wound, surreal as it is, might also be considered. I see my colleagues who have wrestled with this and learned along with me, Denise and Miguel, nodding their heads. So Jimmy, she sort of has entered a realm where any number of her poems might be considered horror.
Right. I have a weird relationship with the horror genre in that I am very, very easily scared. So I don't think I've actually ever watched a horror movie from beginning to end. I don't think I've ever done it. That being said, I obsessively read synopses of all horror movies that come out on the internet because I'm dying to know how they go. So yeah, so I feel that I have a sort of a love-hate relationship with horror where I'm sure the tropes probably filter their way into my poems, but in maybe not in a way that
Right. You could do like a mocking thing or a humorous one, I think might be fun to do. That's
right, yeah. No, I'm very easily terrified. Even reading a synopsis of a horror movie gives me nightmares. So yeah, it's hard. It's not a genre that's always been kind to me, I guess.
So when did you start writing speculative poetry?
That's a good question because I feel like I've always written without knowing that it was speculative poetry or without thinking of it in terms of that label. I mean, figures from mythology, even in my earliest poems, figured. And going back, I looked at my earliest poems. I was always fascinated by characters like Medea and Circe and all these kind of wild women who kind of were
blew everything up.
often murderous, often traitorous, often bad women, but also like who in some ways are just very intoxicating to read about. So I mean, I remember one of my earliest serious attempts at a poem was bringing together Medea and Circe, who by the way in Greek myth are related to each other. I think Circe was supposed to be the aunt of Medea.
I didn't know that.
It's kind of funny, right? It's like women can't be that. Females can't be that wild without some
that powerful. Yeah.
Family. So I guess Greek mythology in particular has always figured into my work from very early on. Sci-fi I've started to, is something I started reading later, and therefore those tropes started filtering into my work later. And so I've always sort of been doing it. It's always
What about Vietnamese mythology? Is Hungry Ghost a part of Vietnamese mythology? And let me tell you quickly why I ask. Because I was watching what I thought was a science fiction show that talks about aliens in America. And they started talking about star children and hungry ghosts and star children. And I was just like, what? So anyway, because of your several ghost poems, I just wondered if that mythology was a part of your source or your parents' mythology.
Right.
Hungry ghosts.
Right. The funny thing about growing up, I guess, in a Vietnamese family, you never know how much of it is your own specific families and how idiosyncratic ways, how much of it is actually Vietnamage people. Right. I met, a few years ago, I met with the Ocean of Ruin. We got to talk and we realized our families shared a lot of the same ghost stories. So I think some of it does go back to Vietnamese folklore. There's a lot of superstition that runs in the Vietnamese way of thinking, the Vietnamese idiom, the Vietnamese way of speaking. My mother told some ghost stories that scared me silly when I was a kid. I think it's so to some extent it is a part of the culture, and I think that does filter heavily into how I write, even when I'm not consciously thinking about it.
Fabulous.
May I ask? I would recommend something to Jenna.
Sure.
Given your interest in mythological themes, I was thinking you might want to read Victor Laval's The Changeling, because there are a lot of powerful mythological female, but it's set in a modern day scenario there. I think it's a fabulous book. It's also now been turned into an Apple TV
I'm watching
series,
it on Apple.
but the book is incredible.
I'll check out The Changeling.
The Changeling by Victor Laval.
He's in New Yorker also, though, so that's a whole nother piece of resonance for you. What inspires you in particular, or are you, as you seem to be, sparked by anything and everything?
Different things. I have a very obsessive temperament. when I see something that interests me, I'll just fixate on it. This drives my husband crazy because he wants to watch a lot of movies, and I want to watch the same movie over and over and over.
Oh.
So different things. I mean, sometimes it'll be it could be any, it could be reality TV, it could be any, it's hard to predict what it is, but when I get fixed on something, I get fixed on it. And so like with my books, sometimes it's an animal species, or like the manatee or like the whale, and sometimes it can be, it's hard to predict what it is.
Well, they're both mammals and so close to us. So I love that you connect with both of them. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Yeah. It's hard to say what. I mean, it could be any. It could be lowbrow. It could be highbrow. There was a show on Netflix, a Korean reality show called Physical 100, which I watched like 6 or 7 times, or maybe more, back in January, because I was just fascinated by these people going back to Hercules, doing these like kind of Herculean physical feats in the setting of contemporary reality TV. Yeah, it could be really. If I knew what it was, I would be constantly inspired, right? Really, all sorts of things. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite form?
The sonnet, without doubt. I grew up, I mean, some of the earliest poems I loved were sonnets, and the St. Vincent Millay has always been very near and dear to my heart. I've always thought the sonnet is a form of kind of an equal opportunity form that both men and women, and really anybody of any gender, can use, and people, it's really a form just where that can really elevate and just take personal emotion and personal perspective and sort of crystallize into this sort of beautiful voice that must be listened to. And it's always been something that, I love the sonnet form. I cannot speak highly enough of what it's done for me, and how much I love it in the hands of people who are masters of the form.
I'm amazed that you find space in your psyche for both poetry and radiology. The math doesn't surprise me, because I found math to be really poetic, but are there any clashes? Are there any difficulties in rendering your multiple selves, mother, doctor, poet? Do you want to speak to that at all?
It's very hard. Right now, I'm going through a fallow period. I haven't really written anything I like for a while. It comes and goes. I just have to trust it to go, to come just as easily as it goes. I mean, I think what works for me is to think of writing as work in the best and noblest sense of the word. That just as medicine is my work, poetry is also my work. And so when I tell, when I meet with students and whatever, I say in my email inbox, whenever I get an email about poetry, I label it with the label work to remind myself that that's also work. That's not lesser. It's not like it's not like collecting stamps. It's a work. It's something that you gotta come to your desk and meet. If you go to your desk and sit your butt in your chair and meet with it day after day, it'll meet you halfway there. It's hard. It's hard. I mean, it's the way it's hard for everybody. I've struggled with it, but it's a matter of mindset, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful struggle. Do you have a routine, a writing routine?
It's tough. I mean, I try. A lot of people work on a daily cycle, right? With sunset, sunrise. I just find that so hard. I can't. I try to work on a kind of a weekly cycle, to try to write every week. Sometimes it becomes a monthly cycle. I love doing the thing where you write every day of the month, but I can never keep that up for more than like a month at a time. So I do that a couple months a year. I'll do that. I tend to do that in April and November. I'll try to write every week. And then the rest of the year, try to write, every week. Try, a more forgiving schedule, but still some attempt at regularity.
Yeah, I love that we've created these occasions to call ourselves to it. So yes, National Poetry Month is my one daily. That's April, for those who don't know. And November, that she mentioned, is National Novel Writing Month.
Right, right. And that's why I latch onto those ones. So I'm trying to feed into the collective energy of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know there's some people who think of it, it's kind of like a gimmick, but it works for me. And it works for a lot of
me
people.
too. Yes. I want to thank you so much for
Thank you so
being
much.
with us. It was wonderful. It was joyful. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yeah, everybody. Jess and Jimmy, it's so good to see you, Denise and Arthur and Miguel. Thank you so much.
Just a delight. And I wish you all well and bid you well-being and good night.
Good night. Be
Bye.
well.